I don't think about the macro stuff. I just important. What you really want to do in investments is figure out what's important and knowable. If it's unimportant or unknowable, you forget about it. What you talk about is important, but in my view, it's not knowable. Understanding Coca-Cola is knowable, or Wrigley, or Eastman Kodak, or anything. I mean, you can understand those businesses. That's knowable. And whether it turns out to be important depends on where your valuation leads you and the current price and all of that. But we have never either bought a business or not bought a business because of any macro feeling of any kind. We don't read things about predictions about interest rates or business or anything like that because it doesn't make any difference. I mean, let's say in 1972 when we bought See's Candy, I think maybe Nixon put on the price controls a little bit later. Let's say we'd seen that. But so what? We'd have missed a chance to buy something for $25 million that's earning $60 million pre-tax now. I mean, we don't want to pass up the chance to do something intelligent because of some prediction about something that we're no good on it anyway. So we just don't read or listen to or do anything in relation to macro factors at all. Zero. And the typical investment counseling organization goes out and they bring out their economists, they trot them out, and he gives you this big macro picture, and then they start working from there on down. In our view, that's nonsense. And if Alan Greenspan was on one side of me and Bob Rubin on the other side, they were both whispering in my ear exactly what they're going to do the next 12 months. It wouldn't make any difference to me in what I pay for executive jet or general reinsurance or anything else I do.
Well, inflation, Keynes said it many years ago that it's an invisible tax that only one man in a million really understands, and it's a tax on people that have had faith in their currency that the government's issued. The best protection, the best investment against inflation is to improve your own earning power, your own talents. Very few people maximize their talents, and if you increase your talents, they can't tax it while you're doing it. They can't take it away from you. So if you become more useful in your activities, your profession, doctor, lawyer, whatever it may be, that is the best protection against a currency that might decline at a rapid rate. And the best investment, passive investment, I think, is a good business. If you own an interest in a good business, you're very likely to maintain purchasing power no matter what happens to the currency. But it's interesting. In the United States, the value of the dollar since I was born has declined by 94% to 6 cents. So inflation is a very cruel tax on people who believe in fixed dollars, but things can work out pretty well even during inflationary times. I mean, if somebody told me when I was born, that the dollar bill is going to go to 6 cents, I might have said, let me go back. I'm not interested in emerging into that kind of a world. But actually, it's worked out pretty well, so I have no complaints.
Inflation, I should say, swindles the bond investor too, and it swindles the person who keeps their cash under their mattress. It swindles almost everybody. And the problem, if you have a business that doesn't take any capital, and let's just say the dollar depreciates 90% or something, so things cost 10 times as much. If it doesn't take any capital, you can charge 10 times as much, and you've kept your relative position. But most businesses take some capital. If our utility business, just say that the dollar is worth 1/10 some years hence from now, we have to have 10 times the capital investment basically, and we get paid a return on that. But we have forced capital investment to essentially keep them in the same place. And I wrote an article that related to that, and I will tell you one famous story which you will all sympathize with, and that I wrote that story for Fortune, and when I finished it, it was about 7,000 words, and Fortune didn't like publishing 7,000 words, and they had my friend Carol Loomis explain that to me, knowing that I would pay more attention to her than anybody else, but being stubborn and male, I said, every word is precious, and they can either run it or not. So then they sent an editor, a very nice guy, out to Omaha. And this guy explained to me that it just wasn't right to use that many words. And I said, well, that's fine, but if you don't do it, I'll write it someplace else or something. Very disgusting behavior on my part. And then I sent it. It was beginning to bother me a little. So I sent it to my friend Meg Greenfield. And Meg was a great editor at the Washington Post. And we were very, very good friends. Wonderful woman. And Meg, who was tough as nails with most writers, but she was kind of nice. She didn't want to really hurt me too much. So I said, well, Meg, what do you think? And she said, well, Warren, she says, you don't have to tell everything you know in this article. And it made the point. And so I write that letter, I write that article shorter, but I'd say more or less the same thing. No, you're better off if you really could have a totally stable unit of a monetary use for the next 100 years, it would be better for business and investors in general.
There's no question that the lack of inflation is a plus for owners. I mean, the real return you will obtain, in my view, from owning American business, if purchased at similar prices, the real return will be higher if we have long periods of low or close to no inflation than if we had long periods of high inflation. I don't think there's any question about that, because that article went on to explain how you got taxed on nominal returns and fictitious returns in real terms. So your question is about which period is better for investors. A low inflation period over any long period is better for investors. And the problem, as you pointed out also, was the starting point in terms of predicting modest returns for equity investors. The returns weren't necessarily so modest, I predicted. They were just modest compared to what people had begun to think returns would be during that long bull market from 1982 to 1999. There were polls taken by Gallup, working with, I think, Payne Weber at the time. Now they've moved it over to UBS Warburg, that showed the expectancy of people in the stock market, and those returns that people expected got up to 14 or 15%, as I remember. And they were thinking they were going to get 14 or 15% in a low inflation environment. Well, that was dreaming. And there's nothing wrong in a low inflation environment at all in earning 6 or 7%. That's probably as well. Well, it is as good as will happen, because in a low inflation environment, how much is GDP going to grow? Well, GDP, if you have a 2% inflation and even 3% real growth, you're talking about 5% in nominal terms GDP growing. If GDP grows at that rate, over time corporate profits will grow more or less at that rate. And if corporate profits grow at 5% a year, the value of those corporate profits, the capitalized value, will probably grow at something like that over any long term with a sort of a normal starting point. And add that to dividends, and you will get 6 or 7% before frictional costs. Investors incur a lot of frictional costs. They don't have to, but they do, and that often is 1.5%, 2% of their investment. So the math isn't bad. It's just bad for those people that got used to or expected very high returns based on looking in the rearview mirror back in 1998 or 1999.